Again, thank you everyone for coming to this morning to our CalTrin introduction to the ASQ-3. Zulema, can you go to the next slide so I can introduce you? Yeah, so just to highlight our speaker, she is a pediatric partnerships program officer from San Francisco's Department of Early Childhood. So thank you so much for being here today and providing this your expertise. She designs and implements activities that support prenatal, postnatal, infant and toddler health. And she has 15 years of experience focusing on strengthening and enhancing services available to children and families. So she provides trainings and coaches, consultation, and then provides technical assistance in a variety of community settings. So thank you so much, Sulema, for being here today. And we're going to
Thank
go
you.
ahead and get started. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. I just want to give a little level set for what we're going to be doing in the time that we have together. I know it's not a lot of time and there's a lot of information, but I'm really good at just being able to answer questions as we go. So the things that we're going to learn today around the ASQ, which is Ages and Stages Questionnaire, third edition. Sometimes I'll drop off that three because it's really just the third edition. So I'll just say ASQ. So we're going to talk more about why it's important, why the ASQ is such a good tool, especially around developmental screening, learning more about child development. Um, we're going to really look at the features of the ASQ, especially those that are going to help us implement with our children and with our families. We're going to look at scoring, but not just the number, because what is a number? We're going to put it into context and talk about those scores to really interpret what they mean, what they're telling us about that child's development. And then we're going to, throughout the whole process, I'm going to be weaving in strategies for consistently involving and communicating with families, which is such a big part of the ASQ, and I'll explain why. But really, it's important to, from start to finish, right? So even before you start handing out the ASQ, really think about strategies for family engagement. How are we involving families in these conversations about their child's development? And then lastly, we're going to talk about using that information, right? Putting it all together and having some idea about what we can do next, right? So I always say screening is a process, and once you have a completed score, that's when screening starts, not just handing the questionnaire. So we really want to talk about what are we doing with this information, because information is only as powerful as much as you use it, right? So you can have all the information, but if you're not doing anything with it, then it's not really going to benefit those child health outcomes. So I also want to start with just some common terms in this type of tool that we're using. And I'm going to go through each one more in depth, but I really want to define what screening is. I really want to talk about what a diagnostic assessment is and the differences between the two. And then I also want to talk about a really key piece of the process, which is monitoring. These are types of assessments for the most part, but they're all interwoven together, and together they build a really nice system that supports each other. So the first level of assessment is that screening. A screening, it should be brief, it should be short, it should be done by everyone, and it's good for everyone. It's really a way to identify concerns or delays and to help us answer that question, like what is going on, right? So if you think about your own life, you get screenings all the time. You go to your doctor's, you get a checkup with your doctor. They put you into a room with a nurse, and that nurse checks your vision, your hearing, your blood pressure, your weight, right? They're just checking in to make sure that everything is looking the way that they would expect it to. It could be that while they're doing that initial screening, you might have like high blood pressure. They don't know why you have high blood pressure. It could be that you were, running late and you had to run to catch the bus, and then you arrived and you're still a little bit out of breath, right? Because you're running late. Or you had a very sleepy morning. You had, more than your 1 cup of coffee, and so your blood pressure is a little bit elevated. Or it could be that there's something really serious going on and they need to check in, right? They don't know why your blood pressure is elevated. They just know that it is. And so that's that first level. Everybody gets it. We're just checking in to see if things are the way that we would expect them to be developing. If something is identified at this screening, right? So we toss in everybody, we filter it out, and then there's going to be a few kiddos that we do the screening for that have some questions around their development, right? That would lead them to the next level, a more deeper assessment, which is right there in the name, a diagnostic assessment, right? A diagnostic assessment is a more in-depth look at that area of concern, one or more areas of concern that were identified through the screening. It's usually done by a professional, and it's usually done to identify the level of delay. So it could be that there's some delay, but it's not quite at the level that would require intervention or interventional services. So, you want to make sure that you're saving that diagnostic assessment for those kids that really truly we don't know what's happening, right? We are seeing, like, for example, delays in their communication. We don't know what's going on. We would refer them to maybe a speech and language therapist, right? A professional in that area to do a diagnostic assessment. They'll just look at that area where we have concerns and say, yes, this child, there's something going on, and they would require a therapist or some speech therapy, right? So if you think about it, we really don't want to, every time there's a concern, just refer for a diagnostic assessment, because that would really create a big backlog in that area, right? We want to use our screening first to really identify those kiddos that would benefit the most from a diagnostic assessment. That it's a little bit more expensive because it requires a professional. It takes a little bit more time. So it would, sort of delay that process for those kiddos who really need those interventional services. And then the last sort of piece of the puzzle, which comes in with both the screening and the diagnostic assessment, and that's monitoring. Monitoring, it's not really an assessment, but it's really using your expertise. It's something that we can do with assessments, right? We might see that there's a screening, and maybe we screen somebody who's 12 months old, right, at 1 year. Most early childhood education centers have mandates around screening. Also, healthcare centers, they have specific schedules, right? So screening is periodic. For example, if you are in a childcare setting and your requirement is to screen every year, right? You have a 12-month-old come in, you screen them at 12 months, and then you wouldn't screen them again for another year, right, when they turn 2. But let's say that family is mentioning that, they just keep getting a lot of ear infections, and we know that that might impact their hearing, right? Do we want to wait a full year? Or do we want to maybe screen at smaller or shorter intervals just to check in and make sure that, like, all those ear infections aren't causing delays? So monitoring is really just sort of eyeballing and using screening as a way to continue to check in, right? I always say that you can never screen enough. You can never screen too much, but you can always screen too little, right? So screening is just really questions, right? We're just asking questions of the family, and so around their child's development. And from what I've experienced with families, they love talking about their children. And so the way that we address it is always like, hey, we're just asking questions about how they're doing, how their health is, and how can we support. But I also want to just remember everyone that screening does not diagnose, right? So if you get a screening questionnaire completed and it has it shows us some delays, and we'll talk more about what that looks like. It's not saying specifically that this child has a developmental delay or a disability, right? Screening just tells us something is happening, and it's up to us to really figure out what, and then to provide the most appropriate support for that concern. Also, I do want to highlight that the ASQ specifically, but any screening tool does not identify specific child goals or skills to target, only information on areas of development, right? So we don't want to teach to the test, for example. There are skills that the ASQ asks that you could maybe, sort of use as a goal, but not all of them, right? So, for example, there might be some skills around threading beads, right? So those fine motor skills. That is something that we want. We do want children to be able to use those fine motor skills for that, for scribbling and for coloring. But there's other items on the ASQ that, they're not really things that we want. Like, so there's questions around, sort of repeating words back. And those are more discriminating items. And those items we don't want to work on it, right? We don't want to just have children repeat numbers back for as a goal. They're there really just in a way to sort of test the accuracy of how we're answering some of these questions, right? So some of those items we don't want to use as a way to target. We want to get information and say, okay, it looks like in the area of fine motor, we might want to put in more support. So we look at all of our expertise, all of the support we have or the resources we have with our curriculum, and then build goals or use other tools that help us build goals on that area that's been identified as having some concern. So now that we have sort of a general idea of what screening is, it's really important to understand why. Why should we screen? And I'm going to use some data that I have from my area, which is San Francisco, the Bay Area. But the reason why we screen is because we know research shows that there are at least 1 in 4 children under the age of 6 who are considered at risk. And that term at risk is pretty broad. For me, the one that really that I keep in mind the most is poverty. Poverty is a huge risk factor. Children who live in poverty are way more likely to have delays in their development for a lot of different reasons, right? And I happen to live in an area that has some really huge, and if you're in California, everybody lives in areas that have really huge wealth discrepancies, right? There are families who are very well resourced, and then a lot of families who are not, right? So if I think about the federal poverty level for a family of 4, right? Federally, what that looks like, and then I apply that to my area, I know that even families who live at the federal poverty level in San Francisco, it is magnified, right? So for San Francisco families, you are considered living sort of as a low-income family in San Francisco. If you are a family of 4, if you're not making more than $156,000 a year, you are considered low income. A lot of the families that I work with do not even hit that, right? So that poverty risk factor is huge. And so for me, 1 in 4 is actually really small. I say it's more because there are a lot of other risk factors, right? Children who experience trauma, which for anybody who lived with, within the past 5 years, right? We all suffered a huge global traumatic event of the pandemic, right? So everybody experienced that together. So that puts us all at risk. And we know that of those children in California specifically, less than 30% are receiving timely screenings, right? They might get one, maybe when they go to their 9-month well child visit with their pediatrician, but then maybe they're not in a traditional early childhood education setting. So they might not get another one or one at all until they hit kindergarten, right? So one is not enough, right? Children are developing very quickly in those first 5 years. And so we want to make sure that we're providing enough opportunities to ask those questions. Also, what we know about California is that even though we're really big and there's a lot of really great things about living here, we are not doing great for our littlest ones, right? We are ranked 44th in the country for screening those children who already live below the federal poverty level, which we know in California is magnified, right? So the importance of screening is really to identify concerns as early as possible. What we know is that early intervention works. If we can identify and connect to supports as soon as possible, the outcomes for those children are increased by a lot. I don't know the exact number, but we know that that we can maybe prevent some more delays, right? Development builds on itself. And so if you're not identifying early, that delay is just going to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And if we can have children connected to supports as early as possible, the outcomes for when they get to kindergarten are going to be so much greater for them. They're going to be ready to learn. They're going to do better in school, and they'll be able to have better outcomes. So I want to give you a little moment to take out your phones, or I think there's gonna be a link that's dropped into the chat for, I want to just sort of see what other benefits you might think. I gave you some, but what other benefits of developmental screening do you think you would have if you were to do this with your families? There it is. Okay. Oh, I think that's the handout link, not the Mentimeter link. And let me just see if I can. Hopefully everybody has this ready. There it is. Okay. Okay. Let's see what we have here. Tracking trends. Yeah, that's a great one. Yeah. And it's almost like a little childhood development journal, right? We screen when they're young, and then we sort of see how they're learning and how their development is going. More knowledge of milestones, absolutely. Early intervention, to give ideas for home visiting and parent-child activities, absolutely, yes. Helping educators and parents know where to explore, looking for delays, getting more, if we're already concerned, this is a great way also to check in and see, okay, is there anything else going on? So these are all great. All of these are benefits, right? It's gonna help develop relationships with parents, right? I think that's one of the biggest ones, is that having those early conversations with families about child development only supports that relationship piece, right? Just to know that, to help families know that you're checking in as well, that you're looking at their child's development, and that you're giving them the information. Peace of mind for parents, right? Yeah, as a parent, it's our job to worry. That's what we do, right? And so we might be concerned about lots and lots of things, and so a way to just sort of, or even like that gut feeling that we get, it could be a way to just say, I knew something was going on, and this gives me the language that I need to advocate. All of these are really great. Quick check-in, yeah. Creating initial conversations, yeah. These are all great, and we're going to talk about all of these as we continue. Okay, I'm going to come back to my oh no, I think I'm gonna, yep. Okay, there we go. Okay. So a lot of you already said it, right? It's a way to identify children who might be at risk. It also helps us learn more about a child's strengths, and give us and learn more about where are there opportunities to practice some skills. Um, and it's a really great way to address those concerns that families might have. It's a great tool for parent education. So really thinking about helping them see their child's development in a very structured way, and it empowers families to advocate for their children, right? They might know that something's going on but not exactly know how to verbalize it. And so this is a great tool for families to get more information so that they can better advocate for supporting their child's development. Also, one of the biggest benefits, and here in San Francisco, we're especially where I work at the Department of Early Childhood, most of the work that we do is always with a lens of um, equity and support, and having a universal screening, which means not just targeting certain children that we're already concerned about, but really making this accessible and universal for all families, regardless of where you live, what race you are, how much money you have, especially if you combine that with comprehensive follow-up services and support. A universal screening and monitoring system really promotes that social equity to maximize every child's ability to enter school ready to learn. We know that some of our children in certain neighborhoods, in with certain income, with certain educational levels, we know that they're not entering school ready to learn. A lot of children are less likely to be ready for school, and this is a way to start working on that issue, is really to make this universal for all of our families and really promote it. And it's also one of the for systems people, it's also one of the cheapest ways to work on school readiness, right? Screening programs are very affordable compared to diagnostic and early intervention systems, right? So we want to make sure that we are maximizing our potential for supporting kids who have delays by utilizing our very affordable screening and monitoring program. So talking about equity and all types of families, we do know that the ASQ, one of the reasons why I promote it so much, I've been working in early identification systems for a long time, and there are other screening tools out there, but the reason why I like the ASQ the most is really its adaptability. It's very flexible in terms of how you can administer it, right? It doesn't require, like some diagnostic tools require the child to be there present with the assessor. This, you can send it home, you can start it, put it down, start it back up, right? It doesn't have to be completed all at one time. You can do a phone call and do it. There's multiple ways, and there's no cap really. There's a lot of different administration methods. What I will say is that you all know your families the best, right? So when you're thinking about your implementation process, really think about your families and their ability to be independent or to be more supported, right? There's families who might need a little extra support. So how are we providing that within our method of implementation? You can offer it in different ways. You can say, if you feel comfortable doing it by yourself. So really, it is very flexible. It also is flexible in terms of the materials. So there are some questions that require materials, especially in some of the like personal social, and we'll talk about that. But you can adapt and switch out items as long as you're keeping the intent of the question intact, right? So, for example, there's a question around eating utensils, right? Some families use forks and spoons, some families use chopsticks, some families use a type of bread and fingers, right? All of that is our materials, right? The questionnaire asks for spoons and forks. But if you are a family who doesn't use spoon and forks, maybe you use chopsticks, right? It's really not about the utensil, it's about the intent, right? So it's really about independent eating. So if they're eating independently, they can use whatever cultural or family value within that. So you don't have to, force a family that uses chopsticks to use a fork to answer this question. You can swap it out and you can say whatever you use as long as they're doing it independently. Does that make sense? Hopefully. Also, the research behind the ASQ, when they sampled it, when they did normative samples, they included diverse populations. So they looked at the census of the United States and made sure that it was representative of all the families, right? Multilingual families, families that come from different, immigrant families, all of those families were taken into account as they were norming the samples. So the cutoffs are a little bit tighter in terms of what we know our families out there are represented in that research. Also, talking about the scoring, it allows for you to omit items that might be contrary or inappropriate to a family's beliefs, traditions, and values. And I'll go more into that. I'll give you an example a little bit later when we talk about scoring. But we can say if this question does not feel appropriate to you based on your own beliefs or traditions or your values, go ahead and skip it, and we'll have a way to score it and still get a really good representation of that child's skills in that area. Oh, and I was gonna, yeah. So we have now, so now I'm gonna dive into the actual tool itself. So I do want to highlight some of those handouts that I've been talking about. The first one on that list is going to be just what is the ASQ? So it's going to sort of recap everything that I've already talked about, like the benefits and what it does, what it's for, why we use it. And then there's also the second one is probably, if you only can download one handout, I would recommend this one. It is the Quick Start Guide. So it basically is this training in 5 pages, right? So it will, especially because I tend to talk very fast because I have a lot of stuff. But if there's things that that maybe you want more information on or you want to just review, the Quick Start Guide is the best resource because it will refresh everything that I'm talking about in that handout. So you will have it ready to go. It will give you some ideas about the benefits, talking to families, scoring, referrals, interpretation, all of it. Everything that all of my agenda is on that handout. So so make sure to download that one if you can only download one. And then the next one is going to be an example of a completed ASQ. This is also just for you if you want to pull it up right now and have it ready to go as I'm going through the features so that you can actually see it in, I have pictures on my PowerPoint, but if you want to see a full one and how it's filled out, that's in there too. That's the third slide. But I just want to also highlight a little bit more about the ages and stages. So what are they? They are a parent or family completed questionnaire. So really we want families to be answering these questions. As early childhood educators or as mental health specialists, infant mental health specialists, social workers, public health nurses, anybody in the medical field, we do have a lot of expertise, right? We do know a lot about child development, but we don't know that child the way that that family does. And so we're really relying on the family's expertise of that child to answer these questions. So we really want to, as much as possible, try to set up a system of implementation that puts the family at the center of completing these questionnaires. And also because it creates a lot of benefits as well. But really, this is a tool that was designed to be completed by families. All of the research that was done that I just talked about was done with families, not with professionals, not with teachers, not with educators, done by families. It is a series of questionnaires. So there are 21 unique intervals, and I'll go into them a little bit later. But there's a questionnaire for children as young as 1 month, all the way up to 66 months or 5.5 years old. There is a questionnaire that spans that whole developmental age and stage. They have a lot of research behind them, so they are tools that have been proven to accurately identify those children who are most at risk for having a developmental delay. And like I mentioned already, they are really great at helping us explain child development and milestones to families in a way that's very friendly and that's very easy to understand, and really gives a lot of guidance around promoting those strengths, supporting those opportunities, and supporting those concerns. So it's a really great family tool. One of the biggest features of the ASQ that I cannot highlight enough is that it is made for families, right? So one of the first questions I get is, can we trust families, right? Do we know that families can answer these questions, right? We're the experts. We did all of that schooling. We know all about milestones, all about child development, all about the different areas. Families, what do they know? So there's a lot of research that has been done around parent report. They are highly reliable in every study, but this is just one, especially when they are reporting about their child's development. Absolutely, they can tell you what their child is doing and not doing, by the way. ASQ-3, the research around this, found that there was a 93% agreement between a parent and professional. So when they were doing their research around the ASQ, they had the same child and they had a professional do an ASQ and the family do an ASQ. And when they compared those two, they found that 93% of the time they were pretty right on. They were basically the same, right? 93 is a really high reliability percentage. And there are tons of other studies that I won't go into, but there are a lot of studies that show us that we can trust families to tell us what's going on in their child's development. Parents are reliable, so we want to make sure that we are giving them that opportunity to share, right? And so that also puts a lot of that work back where it belongs the most, right? We want families to be involved in their child's development. They are the experts on their children. So 93% is not 100%, right? There are going to be differences, but those differences go both ways, right? So it's not always just families that might be mistaken. Professionals often, and research backs me up on this, underestimate children's skills. And there's a lot of different reasons for why that happens, right? One of the biggest ones is that children often, and I can give you a story about this, but children often will not do skills in front of people or in places that they're not the most comfortable in, right? So they might not be as comfortable showing off a skill that they know they can't do. And I remember I was working in a childcare setting, and we were starting up a screening program. And so one of the things that we did first was to practice on our teachers. So we had the teachers go to their home with their children and do an ASQ just so that they could sort of feel what it felt like as a family member. And one of my teachers came back and was like, I had no idea that my child was having some fine motor difficulties. I would have told you that they were doing everything great as a teacher. But what they noticed, right, once they filled it out, they noticed, then they started doing some observations, right? When the tool came back, showing some delays in fine motor, they started observing their child in the childcare setting, and they noticed that they would often shy away from fine motor skills because they wanted to do things that they were really good at around their friends. And so for them, they were like, I would have never noticed it because I don't notice that they're not in the fine motor section, right, of the classroom. They're always doing, gross motor stuff, or they're doing other stuff, right? I didn't observe it because they often don't go to that center. So usually we know that children will do they'll demonstrate those emerging skills in the safety and security of their own home and with people that they're the most comfortable with. We also know that there's going to be higher agreement for easily observed skills and behaviors. So the ASQ does a really good job of choosing those skills that are very easily observed, that there wouldn't be that much disagreement about, right? So for example, there is a a question in the gross motor section that asks, can your child stand on one foot for 10 seconds? That's really easily observed. There's not going to be a lot of disagreement on whether or not they can do it or not, right? You either are or you're not. So the ASQ tries to have as many of those easily observed skills, so that's why there's really higher agreement. Like I mentioned, families are reporting more emerging skills because kids are trying things out in the privacy and the safety of their own home. So families might be seeing things that we as providers might not see yet. So we do want to make sure that families are able to answer those questions, because as I said, kiddos might not be, when we have time to observe them closely, we might be missing things that are emerging, those new skills that they're just learning. And again, children do different things in different settings. There's different materials in a classroom than there are at home, right? So it is important to have the whole picture of a child, not just what they're doing in that moment when we're with them. Another feature around the family engagement piece is that, and we've already talked a lot about it, so I'm going to go a little bit quicker through these, is that family involvement, right? It validates families' concerns. You guys already mentioned this in that Mentimeter, right? So it really helps give parents peace of mind, either way, if they are concerned or if they're not concerned. It also allows us to convey the importance and the value that families bring to us, right? We want to make sure that, research shows that the earlier families are involved with their child's education, the better the outcomes are for the future. So we want to make sure that we're telling them how important their participation is by giving them lots of opportunities to participate and to engage them in these conversations. It can create a lot of moments where we can share our expertise with them and have them share back their expertise, right? It builds a bridge of communication, especially one that's going to be so important if concerns are identified, right? If we start early about talking about child development in a way that's really friendly with a tool that's easy to use, it helps build that trust and that bridge of two-way conversations, right? I'm concerned, you're concerned, let's talk about it. So we really want to keep that bridge of communication open in a structured way, and with a structure that helps us really move that conversation forward. So now, there's a question. I am going to be doing an ASQSC training. I think that's in January, but I'm not sure about the date. But yes, we will. I'm not going to talk about the ASQSC here, but that's the companion tool. That's the Ages and Stages Questionnaire social emotional training or tool, and I'll do that one. Both of these tools are so great, but they're so different that you couldn't do them at the same time in 2 hours. They have very different structures, even though they are companion tools. So I will be presenting on the ASQSE at a later time. Thank you for your question. Okay, coming back to the ASQ, I already mentioned that there are 21 unique intervals, right? In the first 2 years, things are happening so quickly, right? They basically go from, this is going to sound so awful. They basically go from little blobs to walking and talking in 2 years. It's amazing how quickly the development happens in those first 2 years. So because things are happening so fast, the questionnaires in the first 2 years are really spaced closely, right? So there's only 2 months apart, right? There's a 2 months, a 4 month, 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, all the way to 24 months. After 2 years, things start to slow down a little bit, not too much, but a little bit, right? And so we space them a little bit farther apart in that from 2 to 3. So from 2 to 3, they're spaced 3 months apart, right? The intervals. And then things really start to slow down. Things are settling in, hopefully. And so for the last 2 years, for the 3 months or 3 years all the way to 5, they're spaced out a little bit more. So those are the intervals, right? You have 21 unique intervals, and each interval has a window of administration, and we'll talk more about that. But just know that as soon as a child turns 1 month, you can start using the 2-month questionnaire with that child, and it goes all the way up to 60 months, but the window extends 6 months out, so 5.5 years. There's a questionnaire for any child within 1 month all the way to 5.5 years old. The 9-month questionnaire, you can see that has a little asterisk. That one was added into this new 3rd edition. So from the ASQ, the 2nd edition to the 3rd edition, they added the 9-month to make it easier for healthcare professionals who have a mandate from the American Academy of Pediatrics to screen at the 9-month well-child visit, at the 18-month well-child visit, and at 24 and 36. But there wasn't really a 9-month one, so they created one specifically. So if you were in a medical setting, instead of using the 8-month, you could use the 8-month or you could use the 10-month. But if you're doing a 9-month well-child visit, use the 9-month one. Otherwise, if you're not in a medical setting, it really can go either way. The recommendations from the developers of the ASQ say that you can screen every 4 to 6 months when they're under the age of 2, and then every 6 months after 2, or more frequently. Like I said, you can't screen enough, but you can screen too little. Also, I also want to say, understand your capacity, right? If that seems really onerous of a task for your small family childcare setting, where you are the administrator, the teacher, the social worker, the health monitor, everything, right? As a family childcare provider or educator, that might be a lot to do. So, don't overtax your system. These are just recommendations, but make sure that we're screening or that we're setting up a system of monitoring if we can do it more frequently. So these are just recommendations. They're not hard and fast. Like I said, the ASQ is very flexible in its administration. So, set up a system that works for you and that works for your families. So like I mentioned, the 9-month is specific to medical settings because of that mandate from the American Academy of Pediatrics, right? So the well-child visit schedule is very, it's also very taxing for families, to be honest. Like they have to, especially if they're in Medi-Cal or Medicaid families, they have a lot of these well-child visits that they have to do. They have to do, I think, like 15 in the first year. It's a lot. So, but the American Academy of Pediatrics, the AAP, recommends that they do a validated developmental screening tool at 9 months. And so they developed it for that reason. Hopefully that answered your question specifically to the 9-month one. It's really to accommodate the mandate by the American Academy of Pediatrics around well-child visit screenings and their schedule. So this is actually really fortuitous because somebody asked about the ASQ SE. So these are two tools that when used together will give you a really clear picture of the whole child. We're just going to focus on the ASQ-3 today, and we will be offering an ASQ SE at a later date. But the ASQ looks at 5 domains of development, right? It looks at communication, which is both what a child can say, right? The expressive part, but also what they understand, the receptive part, right? So communication is not just words, it's also how you understand those words, right? So like if you can talk to a child and they can talk back and they are understanding, that's the fullness of their communication domain. It looks at gross motor, which are those big muscles in the trunk and the legs, and how they use their muscles, right, as a baby to start to roll over, to start to push, to start to stand, to crawl, to walk, to run, to climb, right? Those big muscles in the trunk and the legs. It looks at fine motor, which are those small little muscles in their wrists and their fingers, and how they use those little muscles to manipulate toys, to dress themselves, to feed themselves, to groom themselves, right? These little muscles. It looks at problem solving, which is how a child is in their environment, right? If they see a toy up on a big shelf that's a little bit higher than them, how can they solve the problem of getting to their toy, right? Will they bring a little stool over and then climb up on that stool to reach up and grab the toy that they want? If they're in their environment and something is in their path, will they go around it? Will they climb above it, right? How they are solving their problems in their environment. It also looks at personal social, which sometimes people think it's social emotional, but it's not. It's a part of it. It's a small area in the social emotional development, but it looks more at those self help skills, how children are adapting to the people around them, right? So it looks at how they're able to be independent, right? So moving towards independence, which is one small area of the social emotional development, but it's really self-help skills. So can they feed themselves? Can they dress themselves? Can they ask for help? Um, yeah. So it's not really the fullness of social emotional development. For that, you do want to go to the ASQ-3, which is all of social emotional development. And it's a big one. So it has its own training. Okay. So now let's get into the actual questionnaire, um, which, so the first thing you see is this cover page. In this cover page, there's two main features that I want to highlight that are going to make it easier for you to implement this with your families. The first one is that administration window that I mentioned, right? So this administration window, which you can find in that little top left corner of the questionnaire, it tells you exactly who this questionnaire is intended for, right? This questionnaire should only be used with children who are at the time of the screening 15 months 0 days through 16 month 30 days, right? That's that tight 2 month window on either side. So when you are screening families, you have to make sure you know what the child's age is so that we can screen for the stage of development they're in. So that's the ages and stages part, right? You want to make sure that you're using the most appropriate questionnaire for the age and stage of that child's development. The second feature that is going to be really helpful is a question around a child who is born preterm. So there's always going to be this question. I always suggest that you get the ages of your children and you ask this question before you start handing out questionnaires, right? Because if a child and this is only for children younger than 2. So if you're like a Head Start center and you're only seeing children, 2.5 to 5, then this doesn't really apply to you. But if you are a center that has, infants and toddlers, then this is a really important distinction, is that for children under the age of 2 who were born preterm or premature, those children typically will experience some delays in their development based on their prematurity. And so we want to make sure that we give them the opportunity to catch up to their peers who were born at term. And so we want to give them some extra time in those first 2 years. So we do adjust their age if they were more than 3 weeks premature. And I know this is going to be a lot of information right now. Trust me, I'm going to give you resources for how to do this easily. I just want to make sure that that you're understanding sort of the reasoning behind, and then I'm always going to give you ways to make it easier to adjust ages, right? But just know that we do ask that you adjust their age if they're under the age of 2 and were born more than 3 weeks. So when we're starting our process for implementation, we might want to say to families, hey, we're trying to get everybody's ages so that we can look at those milestones that are the most appropriate for your child's age. Were they more than 3 weeks premature? And that way we know it in advance so that we can adjust that age. The next feature that I want to highlight is going to be on that next page, right? So you turn the cover page and then you start to see the questionnaire and how how it's structured, but there's always going to be this important points to remember. This is a really great feature if you are going to, or if you think that you're going to do a send home method, right? So if your administration of your screening is to send it home to families, this is a great thing to like maybe just highlight it or like circle it, or maybe you do a small little presentation when you give it to them, or you put like little stickers, because it gives families really clear guidelines around how to fill this out, right? So you can always draft little letters, but this is already built in. So we want to make sure that families know that it's, let me see if I can highlight my laser pointer. Yeah, perfect. We want families to know that they can try the activities, right? We want the most and best representation, right? So if you don't know, right, there's a lot of things on there that families might not know because they might not have thought to like observe it. Especially some of the older months, right? There's questions around beading, right? Like if you're not a family that beads, right, you might not know if your child can bead, right? So you might say, I don't know if they can do that. Try it, right? Here's, if you don't have string and beads, here's a shoelace and some Cheerios, right? And have them try that activity. So we want to make sure that families know that this is not like something that they have to answer or not answer if they're not sure. Try it, make it a game, right? I don't know about you, but a lot of kids, if you ask them to do something, they're especially in those toddler years, they're not gonna want to, right? But if you say, hey, I'm hopping on one foot, can you hop on one foot with me, right? That's fun. That's a competition. Who can hop on one foot longer? Look at me throw this ball, can you throw it farther, right? Like make it fun, and that way you can start to observe. And it's also a great way to like show families that you can be playful. You can be playful while you're doing these things. You want to make sure that your child is well rested and fed, right? Because that's going to make them want to have fun with you. And then it gives you some guidance, right? So you can fill this out you can pre-fill it out and say, hey, we need this back in 1 week, or we need this back by this day. And you can also say, hey, if you have questions, here's my email, here's my phone number. So that way families have a way to know who to go to if they have questions, where I'm going to return it, by when, right? It just gives those really clear guidelines. It helps families. Oh, thank you for that. Yeah, as a family, like I always try to put myself in the perspective of families, like, especially like first time families, like they might not know that that you can do these and be playful about it. And it's not a knock on families, right? Families are busy. They have a lot of things. And if we go back to the beginning where, I was saying about families who are living in poverty, a lot of the families that I've worked with in the past have not just one job, not just two jobs, but maybe three jobs, right? So it's hard. It's time consuming. And so if we can make this as easy for them and to like make it something that's like very playful and fun, and like give them the reason behind it, it's just going to make it a better experience for everyone. So now we get into the meat of it, right? The areas, the developmental areas that those 5 domains, and then the questions. So every domain, so there's 5 domains. Every domain has 6 questions in all of those 5 areas. So there's going to be 30 questions, and these are all going to be scored, right? So depending on how the family answers these questions, we're going to assign a numerical point value. 5 areas, 6 questions in each area. The way that we ask families to answer these questions is to read it and say, yes, this is a skill that I see my child do all the time, no problem. Sometimes, right? So that's the emerging skill. I see it, they haven't quite yet mastered it, but it's there, right? Like maybe out of 10 times, they'll do it 2 or 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, right? It's getting there. I've seen it, they're still learning, right? They still need a little more support, or not yet, right? This is a skill I have not seen my child do yet. And for some families, especially those families that maybe are a little bit more anxious, maybe have a lot of concerns already, we might want to really highlight that yet, right? It's not that they're never going to do it. It's just that they haven't done it yet, right? All children are different. Even children within the same family develop things differently, right? My niece was such a verbal kid from, the minute that she could make sounds, started really just jibber jabbering away. It was like so verbal, could not climb to save her life. Like those jungle gyms really, really challenged her. My nephew, same family, same environment, same almost everything. Was just a gross motor kid, right? Like just barely crawled, went from crawling to running in like 2 months. But at 3, had very little words, right? Same family, same kid, totally different kids, right? So when we are introducing this to families, I'll say, it could be that your child is doing all of these things, some of these things, none of these things. And that's okay. It's okay because what we're doing right now is just gathering information so that we can see where their strengths are. We can see where we might need some practice. We can see what resources we have that can help them support their child's development, right? So we want to make sure that families feel comfortable answering not yet, right? This is not going to impact, and we'll talk more about that communication, but I do always say that as we're explaining it to them, really, really hit that yet, right? It's not that they're never going to do it. And even if they don't, it's okay, right? The kids are different. Every child is different. Every child develops at their own pace. And what we want is to learn more about your specific child and where they are so that we can best support you to help support him or her. There's a question. I have many parents who specifically ask further education between yes or sometimes with scoring. Yeah, absolutely. So yes is they will do it 100% of the time, right? You ask them to do it, they're going to do it, and they're going to do it all the time you ask them. That's a yes. A sometimes is I asked them to do it 10 times, and of those 10 times, they did it twice, right? It's there. They're learning. They're just learning. It's emerging, but it's not a consistent yes. It's coming, right? It's an emerging skill. It's something that they're learning that maybe could use a little bit more support, right? So for some children, let me see if I can. There's a question around flipping a page in a book, right? Can they use their fine motor and do one page at a time, right? Some children are flipping pages, but their fine motor is not so refined yet, right? So they'll grab a couple of 3, right? So that's a sometimes, right? Sometimes they can isolate one page, but most of the time they're still flipping 2 or 3, right? It's coming. They're still learning how to isolate those little fingers to do just one page at a time. Does that explain that? Is that a good example? Let me know if you need more examples. Yeah, absolutely. Kiddos don't want to right now. It's you don't have to do it right now if you've seen it, right? So the difference between a screening and a diagnostic is a lot of diagnostics require the child to do that skill at that moment, right? Screening is not a diagnostic, right? So if you know that the child can do that skill, you've seen it, right? You don't have to try it because you know that they're doing it, right? I know that my child can kick a ball. We play that all the time in the park, right? I'm not going to make him kick a ball right now just to prove that he can. I know that he can do it. So yes, he does it all the time, right? They don't have to prove to you that they can do it. The family knows. So that if they don't want to do it, yeah, kiddos have their own autonomy. We don't have to make them prove. If you know, it's really that trying the skill out is if you don't know, right? If you don't know if your child can kick a ball, because maybe balls aren't something that that they have in their environment that you play with all the time, right? If you're like, oh, that's a good question. I don't know, right? I don't like to kick balls, so I'm not going to give my child balls to kick. That's when you would say, okay, well, let's try it. Let's give him some balls. Let's like show him how to do it and see if he can do it. Thank you for these questions. Really key feature around implementation as well, right? So I'm trying to highlight those features that help us implement. These were written at a 4th to 6th grade reading level. Families who have lower literacy are not going to be able to complete these independently. So if you know that your families maybe are lower literacy than 4th to 6th grade, a send home method is probably not going to yield a lot of really great results, right? You're going to struggle to get them to complete it. And probably a lot of it will be because families don't want to tell you that they can't do it independently. So you'll hear a lot of, oh, I forgot, I did it, but then I left it somewhere, or I think I already turned that in, right? You'll start to hear a lot of things because families might not want to say, hey, I struggled to understand what this is. And so if you already know that about your families, set up a system that is supportive to them, right? Say the majority of your families are going to be able to fill this out independently. So the majority of your families you'll send home, but then say, hey, we also are going to have office hours, right? So any families who have questions, or, this is really fun for us too. We can set up appointments if you prefer, where we can sit and do it together. I'll read the questions out to you, and you can answer them for me. Really try to figure out multiple methods that are supportive for the full range of families that you have, that will help you get completed questionnaires back, right? So you want to make sure that you have a plan B for families who maybe need a little bit more support in completing these as independently as possible. So 5 domains, 6 questions. The way that these questions, and this is going to help us sort of understand and start to really look at that interpretation piece, is really how these questions are ordered, right? So these are ordered in what they call a hierarchical order, which basically means easy to hard, right? So, and I'm going to use the example of a 16-month questionnaire because that's the one that I have in your handouts. So for just the 16-month questionnaire, questions 1 and 2 are going to be skills that a typically developing 12-month-old, or if you want the sort of more technical research behind it, it is approximately a 75th developmental quotient to 100, right? So for the 16-month questionnaire, questions 1 and 2 in all of the domains are going to be skills that are typically developing 12-month-old, or 75% of full development in 60 months. Questions 3 and 4 are going to be skills that a typically developing 14-month-old would be able to, right? Or to be more technical, it would be, I think, 80, what is it? 88% of the developmental quotient. And then 5 and 6 are always going to be at 100%, right? So questions 5 and 6 are going to be skills that a 16-month-old would be able to do. And that's just for the 16-month questionnaire. But that translates over to every single one, right? So 75, 88, and then 100. But if you think about it, right, we can start handing these out to children as young as 15 months. So a 15-month-old, when they get to skills 5 and 6, probably aren't going to be able to do those, right? Because those are skills that a 16-month-old should be able to do. So, that helps us sort of understand a little bit about, like, if we get there, we want to use that as a way to sort of inform us about, like, oh, okay, those skills are going to be tougher for them, right? So it's really a way for us also to check back in on some of those earlier milestones, right? If this is a new kiddo who's coming to our classroom and we haven't had a lot of time with them, this is a way to say, we know that development builds on itself, right? And so this is also a good way to see some of those earlier milestones and how or if they've been accomplishing those, so that we can then come back with recommendations that are really appropriate. Like we can say, oh, somebody said in the benefits, right? Spotting trends. If we're seeing delays at like a certain age range, we can say, okay, something happened at 12 months. And because of that, the harder skills are getting harder for them to accomplish because they haven't really, right? It's going to be hard to walk if you haven't crawled yet, right? It's going to be hard to crawl if you haven't rolled over yet, right? If you haven't mastered that skill. And so we want to make sure that we're also checking in on some of those earlier milestones and seeing where the delay maybe happens so that we can start to make recommendations about how to get to where we need to be. Okay. So all of those, and let me go back actually to highlight something. So all of those questions, those 6 questions in each of the category, you'll sort of see one of the other reasons I like the ASQ is that it's really visual in terms of like as an administrator of the screening to help me remember some of these things, right? So in the questions, right, the 6 questions in each of the 5 domains, families are going to answer it, right? Based on how they answer, we're going to assign it each question a numerical point value, and you'll see that there's like a little line here, and that's a reminder that I'm gonna score this, right? I'm gonna give this a score depending on how the family answered, and then I'm going to have a fine motor total, right? So I'm going to add up all of these questions to tell me what it looks like, what the score for all of these questions for this category, and that's going to be the same in each of those 5 domains. When we get to the overall section, you'll see here that there is no little line, right? There's no little line by each of these questions. The overall section doesn't get scored, it's unscored, but it is so key because it really looks at the quality of the skills, right? We want these skills to be functional for the children. It also asks questions about family and medical history, which as providers, we might not know, right? If we're early childhood education providers, we might not know what's been happening in their history, right? Their health history. And that also helps us make recommendations. It also asks questions about any other concerns. And we know, there is a gut instinct that families have, right? Parent concerns are very predictive. They have done research around parent and family instincts that identified concerns a lot earlier than even like pediatricians. So when I say it's an important section, even though it doesn't get scored, it gives us a lot of really good information. So for example, there's a question around, let's see, question number 4, do you think your child walks, runs, and climbs like other toddlers their age? And it could be that, yeah, they've been walking independently, they can do it, but they're always walking on their tippy toes, right? They tend to walk on their tippy toes. That's something, even so the question, the gross motor would be like, does your child walk independently? And they would say yes, right? This question then would then say, okay, but they're only doing it on their tippy toes. Is that something that we should look at? Absolutely. Tippy toe walking can cause a lot of it could be predictive of a lot of concerns, right? And so we want to make sure that we're asking those questions. Or it could be that, in the communication domain, there's a question around, does your child have this many words, right? Or are they talking? And it could be, yes, they have these words, they're talking, but the words that they have are very hard to understand, right? There's something going on with their expressive language. Like it's very hard for other people to understand them. I understand him as a family because I hear it all the time. I know their cadence, but other adults have a hard time understanding them, right? So we want these skills to be functional. We want to look not just if the skill is present, but the quality of it. And then the last thing that we're going to see is this information summary sheet. This is for us as administrators. If you are doing a send home method, my recommendation is always do not send this home. This is not for families to complete. This is for us to complete, right? This is a way to take all of that information that families have given us by answering all of these questions and for us to put it together in a way that visually and in a way that makes sense to us so that we can start to do the screening process, right? All of this up to now is paperwork. This is where the screening starts, right? So we're going to, and each ASQ interval has its own unique summary sheet with its own unique set of cutoffs, right? And so, but they are organized basically in the same way. So every information summary sheet will have these 5 sections, right? There's a place for you to put some of that demographic information. Each section will have this bar graph with the cutoffs for that interval, right? So you cannot use the 16-month information summary sheet with a questionnaire that's been completed for a 24-month, right? Because the cutoffs are going to be different. This is specific only to the 16-month questionnaire. So you want to make sure that you're using the appropriate summary sheet as well. It's going to have a way to transfer over all of those questions in the overall section. And again, visually, I just want to highlight, it's so great, right? You can sort of see these 3 different shadings, and we're going to get more into this quickly. But you can see if the family circled an answer that is bolded and in capital letters, that's a visual cue that we should follow up on that. That's a concern, right? And so we'll talk a little bit more about this as well, but I just wanted to highlight the visual method. There's always going to be some guidance around the interpretation piece, right? So you can already start to see if a child falls into this unshaded area, what that means. If they're in this gray shaded area, what that means. And if they're in this darker shaded area, what that means. And then there's going to be some follow-up recommendations, right? So we can start to have some of those ideas of like, oh, it looks like this child might benefit from talking to their healthcare provider, right? Or this child might benefit from a referral to early intervention. So we can start to see, and this also helps us track those trends over time, right? If we're giving families these questionnaires periodically, we can always go back to the last one and say, oh, it looks like we recommended you do these activities. How did that go? Or we recommended that you talk to your pediatrician. How did that go, right? It reminds us too the things that we've always already recommended for the families. And then there's this optional, I'm not going to get too much into it, but you can, if you're not going to make copies, if the family's going to leave this questionnaire with you, you don't have to fill it out. But if you're only going to save this information summary sheet, there's a way for you to transfer all of the individual responses for each question. So I do want to highlight another handout that sort of gives some more ideas about introducing screening and questionnaires at ASQ to families. My recommendation is that you look at the frequently asked questions. I'm going to go through some of the bigger ones, because if you can answer these questions, then you can introduce the ASQ to families. So usually what I do is I look at the questions that are asked the most, and then I build my introduction that answers those questions, right? So number one question always is, I don't have time. Why can't you do this? You're their teacher, you're their doctor, you're their social worker, you're their home visitor. Why can't you do this? Isn't that your job? And the way that we want to say, as we're introducing this, we want to maybe say to them, this questionnaire is made for families, right? It's really important that you know your child the best. It's really important for us to learn what you can share about what you know, right? We can talk about how to make this easier for you. We can give you more time, but this is really important information that I don't have. You know your child the best, and it's great if we can work together to figure out how to get these questionnaires answered from you, these answers to these questionnaires. This question I get a lot when or you will get a lot if you're in a system that targets specific children, right? So like if we already have select kiddos that we're keeping an eye on, and we're like, yeah, something's going on and I just want more information, so I'm just going to give this to this family, but not to other families. This is when I get this question the most, right? Why am I getting, and we know families talk, right? So they'll be like, hey, did you get that questionnaire? And another family will be like, no, what questionnaire are you talking about? And then that will, spidey senses start tingling. And so they'll be like, why does my kiddo get it and not yours? Or then the other family's like, well, why does his kiddo get it and not mine, right? So this is a great way to say, nope, nothing wrong. This is something that we do with all of our families, right? These are questions that we have for all of our kiddos, right? we know the first 5 years are so important for their child's learning and development. And we want to make sure that we are asking questions because of how rapidly their brains are developing, right? We want to make sure that it's really helpful to do quick check-ins to make sure that everything's, what are their strengths? We want to learn more about how your child is doing things, how they're learning, and how we can support that learning. Let me see, there's a question. What if I get a question that is related to, does it really matter? It's just something that the state is asking that doesn't really look at the whole child. Yeah, that's a really good question, right? We ask families so much to do so much. But this is really a questionnaire that's not built for us, it's built for them, right? We want to learn more about your child, and we want you to learn more about your child's milestones as well, right? This is about your child's development and how we can best support it. So it's not really going to be shared with the state. It's not really going to be shared with, depending on your system, right? There are things that might be that you might have to share, right? If you're like in like a child protective system, right? You might have to share this with other people. But for the most part, this is really just a tool that helps us better support your child. And that's what we're here to do, right? We're here to be supports. That goes into this, right? And you can also say that this helps us start to look at the whole child, right? We're looking at the fullness of their cognitive and motor development. And if you add the ASQ-SC, you can say, yeah, and then we're going to give you another tool that looks at their social emotional development. And that way we'll get a whole, the fullness of your child's skills and strengths. Hopefully that answered your question. So this is also a really important question to preload, I would say, in your introduction, especially right now. For some families, there's a lot of concerns around, being identified or being in, systems, or having information shared across systems. So we really want to be as transparent as possible, right? For the most part, there are very little requirements around developmental screenings and who you share that with, right? So always I want to let families know that if I have to share this with my my supervisor, if I'm in a child protective or foster care service, right, there are certain mandates that I have to share, and families should know who is going to be seeing this information. For the most part, it really is just the teachers in the classroom, right? So again, this is also a great way to preload some of that referral considerations that we're going to talk about. So I want to make sure that families know that, this is just information for me to better support your child, right? I might put this in my files so that other teachers who are working with your child can see it. I can give it to you. You can share it with your healthcare provider, with your pediatrician, with anybody else who's working with your family. There might be, after you fill this out, there might be some recommendations around community resources that I might have for you. And they might want to see the results, but I'm never going to share unless you give me permission first, right? We'll have that conversation when we get there, right? Right now, I don't know what would best support your child, right? This is why we're answering these questions, so that I can learn more about what best will support. And there might be, some parenting education classes that I might recommend to you. There might be, some other supports in the community, and, they might benefit from seeing it. But if you don't want to share it, we won't, right? There's going to be other things that we can do. So it's always a really great way to just make sure that we're transparent about who's going to see this, how we're going to do this, and what we're going to do once we finish with it. And in that way, we really are sort of building that trust, that bridge, right? So we want to make sure that families know from the get-go what we're doing with this information, how we're doing this information, how we're getting this information, and why we're asking these questions. Let's get into scoring because we're running out of time. Okay, so like I mentioned, I'm going to sort of go through this pretty quickly because I'm going to give you some really good resources, right? So we want to make sure that before we hand it out, right, that that we are getting the most appropriate questionnaire to the family, right? So we want to make sure that we know what the child's age is, so that we can give them the most appropriate. So this is, and again, this is going to be on your quick start guide. So don't feel like you have to take a lot of notes around this, because you'll have this sort of formula and also some resources. The best way to determine a child's age at administration, right, is to take their date of birth and subtract it from the date that we're going to complete the ASQ. So, for example, today is December 12th, 2025. Let's say the child was born June 23rd, 2025. So if we subtract December 12th from June 17th, we'll get 17 months and 19 days, right? One of the things that we forgot to do is to ask if they were born premature. Turns out, yes, this kiddo was 6 weeks premature, right? So then what we would do is we would adjust, right? We would get their age, and then we would subtract the number of weeks that they were born premature to get their adjusted age, right? So if we left it at 17 months, 19 days, this kiddo would probably get an 18-month questionnaire. But because they're 6 weeks premature, once we subtract those ages, it would bump them down to a 16-month questionnaire. So don't think that you have to do this, right? There are tools that will do this for you. So this is a ASQ calculator that you can find on the agesandstages.com website under free resources. There's an ASQ calculator. You put in the child's date of birth, you put in the date that you're going to hand these out, you put in the number of weeks, and it calculates for you. Right there, you can see their chronological age, right? Their age today, their adjusted age, and then it tells you exactly which questionnaire you should give them. You can also use the app. You can download the app onto your phone. If you don't want to download more apps, you can use this at the website. There's also at this website a lot of other handouts and resources. You can also download the age administration. So if you already have a system that does this for you and you already know their age, then you can just use this chart to look up what their age is and then which questionnaire to give. So scoring the questionnaire is really simple. It's just adding, right? So the first thing we want to do is review all of the responses, right? We want to make sure that we go back, and if there are any missing questions, we want to know why. Maybe the family didn't understand the question and wants to ask you. Maybe they put it down and started somewhere else and forgot to go back to it, right? We always want to make sure that we're getting all of the information. So if there's missing items, go back. If a family tells you, you know what, this question is not appropriate for my cultural beliefs or for my family's beliefs, then great, leave it blank. Then we're going to add up all of the responses in each of those areas or domains, right? Anytime a family answers yes, you're going to give it 10 points, sometimes get 5 points, not yet get 0. All of this is also if you ever need to remember, or like, say you haven't done this in a while and you have to score one right now, the information summary sheet also has this, right? So it's going to tell you the yes, the sometimes, and the not yet scores. You're going to go over the overall questions and make sure that there aren't any concerns. If there are, you might want to take some notes so that you can respond to those concerns. If there are questions that weren't answered and it's really difficult for you to get the information, or if the family says it's inappropriate, then we don't, but we also want to calculate a new area total, and we're going to do that together right now, right? So adjusting scores. So the last thing also, I want to go back to this. After you do this, the last step that's not on here for whatever reason is to transfer all of that information into the information summary sheet. Yes, to your answer. Yeah. That's a good question, actually. For example, if a child was born at 35 weeks, they were 5 weeks premature. Yes. Yeah, I think they would be. So you would calculate And if they're under the age of 2, then you would adjust their age using that 5 weeks. But I would just, yeah, I would just do it. And you'll see also after the 24-month questionnaire on the cover page, that question is not on there anymore. So only up to by the time they turn 2, after that, you don't really need to do it anymore. So when a family doesn't answer a question, you don't want to leave it blank, right? Because if you leave it blank, it would be as if we were assigning that question a score of 0. And 0 has a very defined characteristic, right? It's a not yet. And for this, it's not a not yet. It's an I don't know. I don't know, and it's maybe inappropriate for me to ask that family, right? So we don't want to leave it blank, right? Because that would be sort of penalizing the child and the family for their cultural beliefs. And it also is not going to give us a good representation. And so the way that we would adjust the score when there are missing answers is to get an average of the questions that they did answer. So here's sort of the formula. And again, this is also on your quick start guide. So don't feel like you have to take very copious notes because it's already in that quick start guide that I gave you. But the way that you would do that is you would add up the questions that they did answer and divide that by the score that they got, right? And that would give you an average number of points, right? So once you have that average number of points, you would add that average to the question that they didn't answer and then add it up again to get a new adjusted total. Let's practice, right? I always want to get hands-on, right? So here's an example. I'm going to give you maybe a minute or two to sort of either in your head, some people can do math in their head. I am not that person. So I always usually have like a little notepad, or I can just use my phone notes if it's easier for you to add, right? So here is one example of a domain that's been completed. What is the score for this domain? And when you have it, put it in the chat, but don't hit enter yet. We're going to do what I like to call a waterfall. So everybody will put their answer and then hit enter at the same time, and you'll see a waterfall of answers, and we'll see if everybody's answer sort of all at the same time. And that way, for some people who, like me, math is not their strong suit, and it takes us a little bit more time to add, we don't get spoiled by other people's answers. Okay, so hopefully everyone has done the math, and I've given you enough time to put it into the chat. And I'm going to count down from 5. And when I hit 1, hit enter. Okay. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, hit enter. Okay. So we're getting 54s, 45s, 54s, 45s. This is so fun. 54s, 45s, 54s, 45s. All right. $55s. Interesting. All right, thank you. Let's do it together, okay? So right now we have yes, 10 points, yes, 10 points, yes, 10 points, no question, like no answer, right? So we don't give it a question, continue, 10 points, 10 points. So if we look at that question, right, while looking at himself or herself in the mirror, does your child offer a toy to their own image? For a lot of Native American families, mirror play is strongly discouraged in young children. So if this is a family from that cultural background with those traditional beliefs, asking them this question is absolutely inappropriate, right? And so we don't want to leave it blank, right? Because if we add it all up, right, they would get a score of 45. But it's not 45 because this is an inappropriate question. We want to take the average, right? So now we have the average score. We would divide 45 by 5, like somebody put it in the chat right there. And that would give us an average points of 9. And it makes sense, right? So if you look at the way they answered all of these other questions, right? 10s, 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 1, 5, we could safely assume based on how they answered all those other questions, that had this question been appropriate, they would have probably gotten about 9 points for it, right? Based on how they answered all of the other questions. So developmentally, it's appropriate, right? It's taking an average of the skills that they already have and assigning that average so that we're not penalizing them for their traditional or cultural or family beliefs. So then we would add it all up again. And instead of 45, we now have a score of 54. This is really, really key, right? Because we want to make sure that we have the most appropriate information to make recommendations that are really supportive, right? And that are really answering the concern. If we had left it at 45, it might have put them in that gray shaded zone that would then say, we need to do interventions, right? But once we add this new average, it might push them into the above the cutoff where no concerns at all, right? So we really want to make sure that we're adjusting the score. Again, you don't have to always keep that formula in mind. If you download the app or if you use the age calculator, there's also an adjusted score calculator that does it for you. Also at the back of that quick start guide that I mentioned is this adjusting scores. So here in the Bay Area, we have what we call Treasure Island, which is a little bit in between Oakland and San Francisco, going on the Bay Bridge. That island has some apartments. They're building it out more, but back in a couple of years ago, they also have a childcare center. But because it was sort of a developing island, the power would go out constantly. So there were times when I didn't have my laptop, I didn't have Wi-Fi, and so I needed to do it, by hand. And I would just cut this out and laminate it. So I always had it. This adjusting scores, right? Also, really key visually, it reminds me that you can have up to 2 questions per domain without an answer and still have an adjusted score. Once there's more than 2 questions missing, there isn't enough information to get that average. We just don't know. So if you see a questionnaire that has more than 2 questions missing in a domain, it's really important to go back to the family and ask why, right? For the most part, I usually know that if I've done a good enough job introducing it so families feel comfortable asking questions, if I've been transparent and I've set up a system that is really supportive, very rarely do I see missing questions. It's when I haven't done some of that pre-work, right? I haven't been transparent about who sees this. I haven't been transparent about why I'm asking these questions, who's going to see the results, what I'm going to do with that information, or I didn't take into consideration how much support families might need. That's when I start to see questionnaires with a lot of missing answers. And that, for me, is sort of a light bulb that says, oh, I need to refine something in my system. Families love sharing about their children. So if I've done all of that pre-work, I very rarely will see missing responses. Do I have a cultural considerations cheat sheet? We're going to talk about it. Yeah, I do actually. I don't have it as a handout, but we're going to talk about it. Okay. So this is an example of what a completed and scored information summary sheet would look like, right? Once we've gotten the questionnaire completed with families and we've scored it, then we start to see really the work. This is where the work starts, right? So now we have all this information. Now we have to collate it with other things, and we start to come up with recommendations, right? So we can see right here already, there are things that we're going to have to do, right? There are questions, or there are areas where they're sort of in that monitoring zone, right? That gray shaded area. I can also see that there are, in the overall section, even though we didn't score it, there are questions that might require some follow-up. And this might give me some indication, right, about how we're going to follow up and what kind of follow-up we're going to ask, right? So we can already see communication is a concern, right? Sometimes he ignores me, doesn't say many words, history of ear infections and allergies, grandmother uses a hearing aid. All of these are clues about what's happening here. We know communication is very repetitive, right? If he's had a lot of ear infections, and mom's saying he ignores me, I might want to check in on that and say, well, does he ignore you when you're facing him or when his back is turned and he can't hear you? Grandmother uses a hearing aid for how long, right? How old is grandma? Is grandma 80 or is grandma 40? We don't know, right? And so let's talk a little bit about this. Doesn't say many words. Well, let's check in, right? So here are this is where we start the process of interpretation. We're going to do another Mentimeter really quick. I know that we're running out of time and I do want to get to everything, but when we have a completed questionnaire, there are things that we already know, right? We have the total area scores for all of the domains, right? We have the overall responses, like I just said. But what other things might impact those screening results, right? So what other things that maybe we might not know that are existing in the in that child's environment that could impact how they're meeting those milestones? Let me but I need to go. Let's see. Sorry. Give me a second. Okay. Start this so that you can all see it. All right, let's see what, let's see what people are saying. Trauma, hunger. Hunger is the big one. Yeah, absolutely. Cultural factors, environment, parents, the administrator ability. I might want to hear more about that. Parent engagement, mood, home life, illness. Yeah, environmental factors. Yeah, all of these are great. Okay. Ooh, here we go. More. Everybody. The setting. Yep. Lack of knowledge. Bilingual households. Interesting. Social determinants. Yeah. And you can see that the social determinants is small, but you can see them very clearly here, right? Comfort level, hunger, fatigue, illness, anxiety, all of those are social determinants, right? Sleep, social emotional development absolutely impacts a child's screening results. Yeah, these are great. Thank you. Genetics, absolutely genetics. Yeah. Okay, let's go back. Thank you. Yeah. So all of those do impact, right? So when we think about what other things we need to put into our interpretation, right? The score is just a number, but it's really how we put that into context of everything else, right? We put it into context of a child's family and cultural context. We put it into context of a child's environment. Some families have more materials at home than others, right? So opportunities to practice skills. There are times when a kiddo might not have been in a formal childcare setting and didn't have access to child safe scissors, didn't have access to books, didn't have access to writing utensils, right? And so we're trying to catch up, right? So we're trying to give them opportunities. It's not that there's a delay, they just haven't been able to practice those skills. One of the things that we saw after the pandemic, especially here, is that for a long time, playgrounds were shut down, and kiddos, especially kiddos who are the most at risk, living in poverty, will often live in small apartment buildings, maybe 2 to 3 families within one 2-bedroom house or bedroom apartment, not a lot of room to run and climb and use those big muscles. So after the pandemic, we saw a lot of kiddos with some gross motor delays, not because they have a disability or a gross motor disability. It's because they didn't have that opportunity to practice those skills. And so we want to really think about how those things might impact what that child's doing, right? So we want to think about communication styles. Some families value quietness and silence, right? Children should be seen and not heard. Other families are really loud and they're more expressive, and kiddos might be getting a lot of different opportunities to practice those communication skills. I talked a little bit about the environment, geography. A lot of our families who have housing insecurity, they might be going from shelter to shelter, right? And so their kiddo is strapped in a stroller because the streets aren't safe, right? They don't want their kiddo running into the street unattended because they have to be, managing other things. And so a lot of those gross motor skills are starting to get impacted, right? Because there's nowhere safe for them to put their kiddo down to do tummy time. So we really want to think about those things. We want to think about the values and beliefs around parenting practices that families might have, right? Certain children might have access to different types of toys, right? Some families might not give their kiddos dolls or Barbies or stuffed animals, right? And that could impact how they answer some of these questions. Parenting practices around feeding and self-initiated skills. There's this really great video that's floating around where a mom is saying, if I'm late, it's because I'm in the I can do it stage. And it's just this cute little toddler who is climbing up onto their van, and they're trying to get into their car seat, right? And mom's like, can I help you? And kiddo's like, I can do it, right? They get into their car seat finally, and they start to try to buckle themselves in. Mom's like, can I give you a hand? I can do it, right? And so it's just that stage, right? So some families might not, might be a little bit more direct in that I'm not going to even let you do it, right? I'm in a rush and I'm just going to do it for you, right? So we want to take all of that into account. So when there's a domain where or a question that's answered not yet, it's really up to us to ask why not, right? That is the bulk of the interpretation. Why is this child not doing it yet? And that's going to really help us interpret that score, right? Did they, and that will, that will require some time, and it will require some conversations with families, and it will require some digging, right? Some investigative work. Because if we have ruled out all of those other considerations, all of those other biological considerations, genetics, environmental factors, healthcare factors, if we are still seeing this delay, then at that point we say, oh, it's not because they didn't have the opportunity. They've been in a childcare setting this whole time. They've had all of these opportunities, and they're still not meeting this milestone. That then, to me, is a what next, right? So we want to make sure that we're taking the time to really not just end at where the score tells us, but to start there and interpret and come up with some really good recommendations. Oftentimes, I'll see a score that falls into some of these the cutoffs, and I'm going to go into the cutoffs right now. It starts there, but after I've had conversations with families, it ends up that the best recommendation is not a referral to a diagnostic. It's more opportunities to practice. It's more targeting domains to give them that practice time in their skills. So the cutoff points, let's talk a little bit about these, right? So like I said, sometimes a kiddo will start here. This is where their score is telling me, but after conversations with family, after lots of observation, after lots of digging and interpreting, I might say, okay, well, even though this is what you're telling me, it really might be more that they're over here. Okay, so this is a very traditional bell curve. Some of you might recognize it from other types of assessments, right? Most of a population will fall within this average range, right? You'll have a small percentage that is maybe above average, and then maybe a even smaller percentage that is way above average. This questionnaire is not for these kiddos, right? This questionnaire is for these kiddos, right? So on the other side, you'll have a small percentage of kiddos that are a little bit below average, right? One standard deviation. And then you'll have a smaller percentage, the kiddos that are way below average, right? So we want to, so if a family answered yes to every single question, they would get 60, 60, 60s, right? All that we're saying is that they are here, right? It could be that they're here or here. Again, this questionnaire is not for these kiddos. We want to know who's here so that we can really, really support the kiddos that most need it, right? So this is this unshaded area is just here. This, what we call the monitoring zone, this gray shaded area is here. And this darker shaded area is here, right? So this is where we want to start and then have conversations to see how we can support these kiddos to try to move them back over here. Oh, you know what I also did not do is so let's talk about having those conversations, right? Communicating the results with families. There's also a handout. Oh, there's two handouts that I didn't mention. So for the scoring, there's also a scoring guide. And then there's also a handout on best strategies to have conversations with families. So we want to share screening results with all the families, regardless, right? If there's no concerns, it's important to let families know no concerns, right? Together, we're going to come up with our next steps, right? We're going to decide if we're going to, we always want to be seeing, the next stage of development. So here are some things that you can do at home. Here are some fun activities that we're going to do here that you can also do at home, right? We want to share everything that we're doing. We might decide that we want to talk to our other trusted childhood professionals, our doctor, our pediatrician, our home visiting public health nurse, whoever, right? We might say, if you feel comfortable, share that with them, right? We might also say, here are some other resources, right? Here's early intervention services, here's parenting supports. Together, we're going to say what works for you that would best support you in supporting your child's development. We want to make sure that we are talking about, if we have families that are maybe there's a language issue, right? They might be more comfortable in a different language. We want to make sure that they have access to somebody with that language. We want to make sure that we're doing it in a timely manner and that we're doing it in a place that's comfortable and private, where you don't want to share results with other families around, right? This is, we want to make sure that families know that we are treating their information with sensitivity and privacy and confidentiality. We always want to start by celebrating the child, right? I don't know about you, but if you start telling me what's wrong and then you start telling me everything that I did right, I'm not going to focus on what I did right. I'm going to focus on what I did wrong. And so we always want to make sure that every child, we're celebrating their strengths. We're starting with everything that's going great. And then we lead on to, and here are some things that we can work on, right? We always want to make sure that we're using language that families, that is family friendly, right? So it's not a test, right? It's not even a screening, it's a questionnaire, right? There's questions. You don't pass it, you don't fail it, right? I don't even use cutoffs, right? I don't say above the cutoff, monitoring zone, below the cutoff. What does that mean to families? Nothing, right? So I say, these are the child's strengths. Here are the skills that are in progress, right? Things that they're learning that we can support. We can give more opportunities to practice. Or here are areas that might need some additional support, might need some additional information, all of those things, right? We want to make sure that we're letting families know and that we're giving them an opportunity to share their observations, right? They might already have strategies that they're using that will help. Having difficult conversations is part of this process. We know that there might be really challenging conversations, and we might know that this is a family that we're going to recommend that they do that diagnostic assessment, that they might have to go to their early intervention system or their early childhood special education system and get some of those tools. But all families start here. Most families start with no concerns, right? And then if we jump to referral, that's a big leap, right? These are, so if we take them from, I'm not concerned right now, to like, oh, you need a referral, families might have some reaction to that. So these are some of the very small steps that you can take to jump, right? Some families are going to be right there with you. They're going to come in saying, I want a referral, right? I already know, I already have concerns. And if so, that's great. Most families will probably need a little bit more, right? And these in no particular order, by the way. These are just things that you can do, right? So just stopping and listening, right? No judgment, right? Whatever that family's experiencing is not up to us to judge. I often will say that we're only seeing like the very tippy top of the iceberg and not the fullness of a family's experience. And so there could be reasons why we give them referrals, we give them suggested activities, and they don't do it. And we don't want to judge them for not doing that. We want to be empathetic. We want to listen. We want to support their journey. We don't want to push it, right? Every family, just like every child, moves at their own pace. But we want to check in and say, hey, here's my recommendation. How did that work for you? If it didn't, let's try something else. Sometimes they just need a little bit more information about milestones, right? They might say, well, what's the reason you're concerned, right? Like I didn't talk until I was 4. What's the issue? So we want to give more information about the system, about the concern. Sometimes it is just as valid to say, yeah, this is scary. I understand that maybe something's going on, right? Like if you think about for these kiddos, they've only been on this earth for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. That's not a lot of time. And so we do want to say, I don't know what's going on, but I'm going to be here to help you find out, right? I'm going to be here. I'm going to be patient with you. I'm going to be flexible with you. Whatever you need at this moment, it's up to me to provide that support for you. And it's really up to you, family, to make the decisions that best support your family, right? Families, and you have to sort of gauge where they are, right? When you start having this conversation, do they look relieved? Do they look upset, right? And then are they defensive? Are they disagreeing? Do they just need more time? And then sort of tailor that conversation based on where your families are, right? Like I said, some families are going to be like, oh, thank God you said that, right? I've been having this concern. I didn't know how to articulate it. Let's go. Other families are going to be like, well, I might want to talk to my pediatrician. I might want to get a second opinion, right? It's really up to us to join the family. It's not up to us to convince them that they need to take a referral. It's up to us to support what they want and what's going to be best for their family. I know we have very little time, but I just want to sort of think about also as you're building a system of universal screening to make sure that you kind of understand sort of the buckets that kids will be falling into and what sort of supports you can start to preload into your system, right? So when there's no concerns, you can always consider, rescreening at a later interval, right? Providing some resources, some activities, some information around milestones, around the next stage of development. You might have some kiddos who are sort of in that like, I'm not sure if this is a delay or if this is, just needs more practice. Let's see what we can do, right? So we give them some targeted suggestions, and then we reevaluate, right? We screen them, maybe instead of a year, we screen them at 4 months or 2 months, depending on their age, right? Or after all of that intervention, still not meeting milestones, starting to get more and more delays. So then maybe we say, hey, this is a kiddo who would benefit from that next step of assessment. Or there's kiddos who, like I said, they're already there. We already know that it's not any of the other factors and we need more information. We need that next level, right? So they're going to go directly. After that, they might say, hey, yeah, there's something going on, but it's not at the level that they are eligible for services, right? So we just put them right back in and continue to do this process. Or they're eligible and they get the system, right? So we know the system of early intervention and early childhood special education is long, right? So it starts with the ASQ, then goes to the referral, the early interventionist or early childhood special education, they do an evaluation. If they're eligible, great, they have an IFSP or an IEP, and then they start getting services. This process, by the way, can be so complex. So I always recommend that that you check in at every part of it, right? So even that referral piece, if they're missing some information, the process stops, right? At the evaluation, they might not be doing the full evaluation, or the child might not be eligible. And so we have to start from the beginning, right? So this is what we want to sort of share with families, that this is a process and that we're going to support, right, in whatever way. Another great recommendation is always to go with the primary healthcare provider. They might determine that this delay is something that is caused by a medical condition. And so they might be eligible based on their insurance and not just the early intervention system. So always talk to their primary healthcare providers. Recommend that families take the screening to their doctor and share it with them, so that they can see specifically what the concerns are. And then very quickly, we have some ideas, right? So on that Ages and Stages Questionnaire, or agesandstages.com, there's, and in your handouts, there's also an example of these activities that you can always do. You can always do more interventional activities specifically for the concern, or you can refer to a care coordinator in your area or in your system. So thank you so much for being here. Screening tools, I know, seem daunting, but they're really important. They can help with that conversation, those conversations. We know that developmental issues are very complicated, and this is a way to start to demystify those issues, to really think about what we can best do to support, and that we really should base our referrals on not just the score, but a variety of other considerations. So I know this was just sort of a brief look at how screening tools can help. But if there's any questions, I can stay. I know that we're a little bit over, but I'm willing to stay and answer some questions. I know we have some here, more in-depth information on how questions were selected and why they assess. Yeah, they actually, on agesandstages.com, they have a full technical report that you can download and see sort of and they have appendices of why they chose specific questions for those domains. It gets really complicated, but if you're somebody who loves technical reports, that one is for you, and it's on that website. In terms of like why they choose, development is so broad, and we're really, if you just think about communication, right? 6 questions is not the breadth, right? These questions were specifically designed to identify different types of delays as easily as possible. I hope that answered your question. Any other?
Zulema, we just want to say on behalf of CalTrin and behalf of the participants, just thank you so much for being here, for the information that you provided. Many people did talk about how grateful they were, not just for the responses to their questions, but also the handouts. So I just